Our special guest today is Stormy Simon. Stormy's an e-commerce pioneer, corporate leader, cannabis activist, inspirational speaker, and the host of the podcast Lunch with Stormy. And we're told she just celebrated her 1 year. Congrats on that, Stormy. An unconventional leader who charged straight into the workforce. Stormy bypassed college and business school, landing at Overstock.com in 2001 as a temp. She spent 15 years at that company, ending her remarkable tenure in 2016 as both a board member and president when she surprised the business world by venturing into the cannabis industry, bridging her advocacy with her professional life. She's known to march to the beat of her own drum for sure. One of Stormy's guiding mantras is, sometimes you don't know what the next step is, but you still have to take it. Stormy, we're so honored to have you join us here on Understanding CBD. Welcome this Sunday.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. We're going to have a lot of fun today, I promise. And congratulations on the 1 year podcast. Max and I just celebrated our 1 year back, I guess, a couple months ago. I'm sure you love doing it because you made it through the year. What have you learned this first year of doing the podcast? And are you going to continue?
Yes, I'm going to continue. And the learning was really interesting because it happened during COVID. So the planning for the podcast was all pre-COVID and all the things you were going to do in life in 2020. And the execution of the podcast was sitting in my home, figuring out what I was going to do in 2020. So it was a really good time, therapeutic because of the time that we were all going through. And I am going to continue it, but a little more professional and a little more on-site, I think more out in the world than just in my home.
Yeah, as things open up. What's the main focus of your podcast? Who do you target with your interviews?
I like to talk to people. It's kind of like where Business Lunches left off, where it can be casual. They can talk about their lives of what they've done because there's many successful people in the world, and some people think they're unobtainable or they're not like them, but it turns out we're all just waking up every day trying to do our best. And, you know, learning about somebody's life and family versus their career is what I like to talk about at lunch.
You know, Stormy, waking up every day and trying to do our best. I mean, I know that was a motivator for you. So I want to focus a little bit on Overstock.com. What an absolutely remarkable story. You started there as a temp and finished off as the president. Would you kindly walk us through that story?
Well, timing, you know, anybody can say they've had this great career and it was all a lot of hard work, which is very true. You can't do it without the work. But timing has something to do with it, and walking in at the time where an industry was being formed was part of the success. But being in an environment where I could raise my hand because nobody knew the answers, so there were no bad ideas, was really helpful for me bypassing college and doing something that had never been done before was kind of my jam. I loved the idea. I remember the day I walked into the CEO's office and I said, I think we need a marketing department. Do we have a marketing department? And he goes, no, that's a good idea. And he said, well, okay, what should I do? And he said, you should go start a marketing department. And
what department were you in at that time?
At that time, I was probably doing some of the marketing. I would do everything. I would look around and look for the daylight of things not being done, which is the beauty of joining a startup.
Mm-hmm.
You'll always find your jam. So I was doing many things. I did some PR, worked as chief of staff, built a B2B department from zero to 20 million. Built a books, music, and video department from 0 to 150 million at a time. So there were just these great wins that I was having. But I started that marketing department. I didn't last there long. I grabbed a couple people, and they took the reins later. But I did our branding the entire time, customer service. I became president in 2013, left in 2016, and from temp to president, there were many titles along the way, and, you know, things that I was able to do and prove to myself that I could do, which I think was part of the biggest lessons for me in business was, you know, to know that I can do it. You know, I not only was at a company that grew from 18 million to 2 billion, I was driving it. And that was really, you know, when you look back on it, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was really quite an honor.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really incredible performance. So now I have to ask you, right? So you're president of a $2 billion company. Was it $2 billion in sales annually?
That's B with billion.
Yeah, all right. So that's a large company. You resign, and you start in an entry-level position in the cannabis industry, right? What were the people close to you saying?
Oh, that was a brutal time of my life. Like, you think you get these lessons as you get older. My birthday's coming up on Friday. I don't like to say my age, but I'm somewhere in my 50s. And, you think you get these lessons in life and, gain your confidence. You kind of forget them. I didn't really realize that the whole world still thought cannabis was a bad thing. Most people thought I was crazy. My family has always loved my decisions and my crazy ways. But friends and colleagues, many colleagues that I considered friends, took a step back, and they're all emailing me today on LinkedIn like, hey, how do I break in the industry? Hey, what do I do? But at the time, they were really hands-off and really quit talking to me. And that's okay. I still stand behind my decision. I went into cannabis knowing that the movie had been going for 10,000 years. I didn't think it was going to start the day I walked in the door just because I could run a company. So I didn't want to walk in, with my chest out and, I'm going to show everybody how to build in an industry that this hasn't been done before. But the truth was the plant and the supply chain has been happening for years. People who did this before legalization did it to the tune of $56 billion, we guess, in a year across America. So when we talk about building companies, I was looking at people who had built them differently and had created a revenue differently and had also delivered my medicine to me for as long as I'd needed it in my life, and that fascinated me. The idea that the state was ahead of the federal government excited me. Like, that is the time we should all really pay attention to, regardless of the content. And I wanted to know about the plant. I wanted to know how it grew. I wanted to know why it was a medicine. I wanted to know what regulations were coming on it. I remember in Overstock, nobody had shipped couches. We shipped couches first. We shipped to your door, big rugs first. And, I was putting those scenarios together, and that's why I wanted the ground floor. The offer was a chunk of equity in the company. They were medicinal-only growers and dispensaries. And, to take equity in company, you have to take a big position and you got to perform. I had just come off of a 15-year sleepless night, and I wanted to sleep. So I thought, let me get my feet wet, let me learn, let me pay respect due to the people that can't just walk in the door legally, that sit in prison. And I wanted to do that, and that's where I started.
Very genuine. Do you have a personal CBD story that you're okay sharing?
I have my cannabis story, and while I think that, we can say that we use cannabis for medicine, which we all do, even if you don't know it. But I refuse to put that as my lead. As a human being and a plant, I can civilly use it because I choose to. It obviously has done well in my life, and I have no fear of it, or I wouldn't choose it and wouldn't support it and advocate for it like I do. So, yeah, I do have many stories done just with my own personal research and about my body. So I just suggest other people do it. For me, I don't need to, people don't ask you what hurts when you go pick up your Lortab prescription. And they don't say to you, hey, are you on an antidepressant? Yet, when we go into a dispensary, anybody that drives by a medicinal dispensary and sees you, they'll be like, oh, I know those 10 things in our state. I disagree with having to come forward with an illness in order to use a plant. So, yes, I have my stories, and they're beautiful and awesome. But my advocacy now is having access for everyone without outrageous taxes and people in prison.
I wanted to kind of pick up where we left off, at least. So you were at Overstock.com, $2 billion, president of the company, left to start grassroots in the cannabis industry. And then last year, you actually campaigned for a seat in the Utah House of Representatives. What inspired you to go into politics? You don't seem like a politician.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not a politician at all. I live in Utah most of the time. I grew up here, and I'm a single mom here. Wasn't raised to be religious at all, so we have many religions within my family. We moved from Chicago to a very conservative place where religion was part of the conversation. What was your exact question? I was just going to go on a tangent.
Yeah, no.
Tangents are cool.
So you're in a small town. We know Utah's religious.
Right.
Yeah, why would you
not
run?
About religion.
And not
So
only did you run, but you went to run against a person that has been in that seat for how long?
An incumbent?
Yeah.
A long time.
Yeah, he's been there basically
10
since
years.
they started, you know?
It's like you didn't need
we
any
do
more
every 2 years.
complexity in your life, and you decided to
Yeah,
run.
I didn't want to go on a Mormon tangent because my point wasn't about that. It was about the conservatism that environment might bring. Even though I'm 40 years later here, there's still a tempo in which we operate in Utah. It's a very red state. Given the political environment, and more so given the gateway that cannabis was for me, which I could talk about how many eyes it opened for me.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know I had so many eyes, one of which was the education and the fear that people had within my state. I spent time in Denver, California, both within LA and San Diego, and those are very safe, comforting states. The conversation is very elevated when it comes to cannabis because they've allowed their constituents to learn. And I wanted to start that conversation. I also wanted to stand up as a woman that was single, that may have tattooed an arm or two, but found great success with my hard work within a state where she's not around a lot. When you look, we have a very super majority. There was no way I was going to win that fight. But more than that, if I had won that fight, I would have been walking into a room that I would have not been able to affect other than with words, hoping someone would listen. And that's why I ran. I wanted people to feel like they can be different and have different opinions and still play a piece of our political process in a very volatile, hateful environment. And the hate came at me. It was crazy. I mean, I was running with where there's maybe 20,000 voters in a town I grew up in. Like, hey, guys. And no, it turns into really meanness. And I think everyone should do it. It was the best education I could ever have with politics. It gave me a view of local politics and the importance of picking your zip code, because as we continue to find each other via hashtag, we'll continue to make communities in which we're like-minded. That was why I did it. I wanted the herds of Utah, or the people that, even if you are conservative, Mormon, whatever, who cares? If you like cannabis, you're curious, you need to learn that people aren't sinful. Like, these conversations have to start with someone who actually had the credibility in business.
And I love the fact that you went for it and did it, fully embracing and knowing that you may not succeed. And failure is such an important part of life. You made the comment, if everybody should do it, they should do it, just to experience that. So how do you deal with failure?
Failure, it's really interesting. So I had really good mentors at Overstock, and the matrix in which Overstock allowed me to reach. And within the company, we would say, you have a lot of words people use at work. So, did you get the coffee cup? Yes or no? Well, an employee will say, well, anyone will say, not an employee. Well, I started to go to get the coffee cup, and I was walking to the kitchen, and then it's like, wait a minute, you have it? Wait, I want to tell you, no. Did you fail or succeed in getting the coffee cup? I failed. Okay, well, it's not a big deal. I hope you can bring it tomorrow, right? So failing, if you look at, I failed 10 times today already, I'm positive. If you really look at what the word means, but I deal with failure as just another word. I can't, if I didn't know failure, it would mean I never tried. Or, so within the workplace, you better fail a lot. I can tell you this, if you want to win, you better lose a lot before you win, because that's where your lessons are. Those moments where it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
If I had $1 for every time we failed, Max, we'd be a $2 billion company.
We'd be a $2 billion company. The big O.
The $2 billion is $1 billion is hard for people to comprehend.
That's
like if you actually counted to $1 billion, it would take like 90 some years.
Yeah,
just to count to
a billion.
It's
a ridiculous valuation.
Anyway, enough talking about you, Stormy. We're going to get into the demonization of cannabis here. So, I've heard you talk about the demonization of cannabis back in the day and the blockage of medicinal use, the cultivation of the plant. Can you tell us how this impacted your decision to get involved in the industry?
Yes. Well, I was always as a teenager, I was introduced to cannabis at the very first time that I consumed it, which was by smoking. I didn't know what it was. My brothers told me, I started that path alone. And every time I talked about it with someone, I realized that they really thought it was bad. I had to keep it a secret. As I got older, High Times was a magazine that my brothers had that I could read, and it was educational. It had information, not just pretty pictures. Once I made the decision to jump in, and just within the first few people that you meet, I immediately met parents of 6 children out there, not stumbling along anymore, but stumbling alone in the world, fighting for their child alone. They're paying for medical insurance. They've paid their dues. They've paid Social Security. They paid in the welfare system. But when it comes to this fight and their ability to choose the way they'd like to handle their feelings and maybe things that haven't been done before, these parents are alone. Why? Why? Every single one of us has heard of, and if you haven't, it's easy to Google, anecdotal stories of people that have had miracle events. Now, I have too, and I read them too. But when I started meeting them, and, not everybody wins, this story of cannabis saving everyone is not going to be true. Maybe after the science, but not today.
Yeah.
When you meet them and you see them and you see their fight and you meet with doctors in legitimate medical facilities that want to do this, that are curious and also fighting for it, but in the background because they'll lose their jobs, it changes your mind. It made me ask why. What the bleach, right? I wanted to know why. How could that possibly be? Well, I went back 10,000 years ago. I do a whole talk on this, and I won't today, but that's when the story of documented cannabis, hemp, marijuana, weed, whatever somebody wants to call it. That's when it starts, 10,000 years ago, long before we had opinions.
Yeah.
Throughout history, this was used freely by people as medicine, grown plants, plastic. We were just discovering all these amazing things. Henry Ford, his first Model T was made 10% hemp, and his thought was to keep the farmers employed. 10%. All of that was outlawed. Paper, because of Hearst, with his 27 publications that he was pushing out. The Mexican War had happened, so our Mexican friends came in and they brought marijuana. We knew it as cannabis. Gas pubs open. Black people like to. And white people at the time, and I'm white, we're white, people are white, but this is history. It doesn't have anything to do with it. It's history. It's true. Used it as a weapon, and that's when it started demonizing. At the time that this is all happening, the Medical Association is fighting for the right to continue studies. On our Senate floor, 2 people that we vote in to protect us as Americans, they begged for it. It was denied. Business went on as usual. If you follow the train of people, the matrix of where people are related and how it goes through, there's pharmaceutical prices, all sorts of things that start within the 30s. So the demonization started a long time ago. And once you realize the number of people that are in prison, the harmlessness of this plant, which is upon everybody to go learn on their own, not upon, I don't even know the name of the guy that runs the FDA.
Right.
What's his friggin' name? Who knows? I don't know him well enough to trust him, so it's on you to educate you. And when you learn and you get past the fearlessness, you will wonder why your tax dollars are also, in addition to your pharmaceuticals, the fight against this plant, your tax dollars are also paying for people in prisons, both federally and in your state, for non-criminal cannabis offenses, and still to this day, first time. So when you go through that, if you can't, that affected my life as a human and an American. It made me run for office. It made me think, everything I learn about CBD and cannabis, the whole plant, THC's in there too, everybody, is okay. It's okay. It's good. It's worthy of our attention. It's worthy of the study.
I want to talk about that demonization because and you mentioned medical professionals and doctors and such. The problem is that we run into a bit of a conundrum, right? People should talk to their medical professional or doctor about this subject, but unfortunately, most of the medical professionals are not prepared or ignorant on the subject. So how would you recommend that you start this conversation with a medical professional or a doctor?
You know, first off, when you go into a doctor, you're your own advocate, and you better be ready to be. They're not in charge of you, and they're not the smartest person in the room. You know, if you're an accountant, you're for sure better at math. So when you go in, you have to develop the relationship, trust them enough, and start sharing your experience because they need to know. I started telling my doctor I used cannabis many years ago, over 20. And now throughout health issues that I've come up with, things that I've encountered, we can point to that as part of my regime, part of my medical package, my medicine. And that's how he's come to start viewing it. Your physician is your quarterback. You go to him and you tell him how your body plays. He's not going to know one thing. You tell him, I use cannabis. I tell my doctor, I put THC cream on my tendinitis and it works. I'm not going to take an anti-inflammatory. I'm just going to do that. And that conversation helps your doctor. It helps you. You know, I'm fortunate enough that I had a doctor I was able to take a gummy to so he could experience how I was able to get off sleeping meds.
Great.
That's a good way to make friends.
And at that point, we talk a different language, right? We're talking a different language. He knows what I'm saying. He can now prescribe me in a way that's like, you know what? I get it. That does work for you. Okay. He accepts it. But it's your job to educate your doctor and to educate them about CBD. They're not going to educate you. This is on you right now. The day will come, but it's not today, and you shouldn't wait for it.
Yeah, and if you have a doctor that's not allowing you to have a peer conversation and respects your individuality, then you need to find somebody else.
That's the other thing.
Channel your inner Stormy and go in there and demand some action here.
Bring them a gummy.
You know what I mean? Well, so we've been talking really about the health and wellness aspect of cannabis. And in prep for our next guest, what's your feeling about the other industries that cannabis is touching besides the health and wellness space? Do you see any impacts on other industries because of this plant?
Well, you know, when I think of a product, which this plant is, and how it moves across the United States, and, you know, all the supply chain, the technologies, the efficiencies, a lot of that stuff already exists in other industries. So how does this plant affect a Pfizer? Well, my belief is we're not federally legal because Pfizer's not ready for it. The Pfizers of the world. I love Pfizer products. I take Pfizer. I'd invest in them, whatever. But, you know, insert pharmaceutical company there. That's my belief as they're getting ready for federal legalization.